Hey everyone, Mario again, coming at you another review, another Oscar review actually. Now, first of all, I'd like to apologize for any noise in the background. It's my fan here. It's a little hot here today. I have it on low, so the noise in the background should be at a minimum. Anyway, today I'm reviewing a film that I've been meaning to watch for the longest time, and both versions were on Netflix, so I decided to watch the theatrical version. And since it's that time of the year, I felt this film qualified for this, so why not? I watched it this morning right after I woke up. Good way to kill the early morning hours. I have to say I really do enjoy the film. The film is the 1979 film directed by Francis Ford Coppola, Apocalypse Now. The film has an 8.5 on IMDb, a 94 with the audience on Rotten Tomatoes, and a 99 with the critics. Think about that. Not that many movies have scores that high on Rotten Tomatoes. There are ones that get praised, but not usually to that degree. Here's the consensus. Francis Ford Coppola's haunting, hallucinatory Vietnam epic is cinema at its most audacious and visionary. I will agree with that. While I haven't watched all the films, I've seen enough of them to know how his style is, and you can see a little bit of his style in here, but there is a little bit of experimentation in here. And I think the main reason for that is because of the nature of the film, its plot being a loose adaptation of the classic novella. It's a novella. The classic novella Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, and also this following in the wake of his two Godfather films, because he started filming this 2 years after The Godfather Part 2 came out. Now, the film stars Marlon Brando, Robert Duvall, Martin Sheen, Frederick Forrest, Albert Hall, Sam Bottoms, a young Lawrence Fishburne when he was known as Larry Fishburne. And when you watch the film, you really do see how young he was in this film. I remember right, he lied about his age. He was 14 at the time, which, given what his character is supposed to be, a young Vietnam soldier, good thing he did, because it fits the character. And of course, the late great Dennis Hopper. And the music is by Carmine and Francis Coppola. Now, before I get into the film, I have to talk a little bit about the source material. The source material, Heart of Darkness, is by the writer Joseph Conrad, which I don't remember specifically what country he's from. I'm going to double check.
I'm tempted to say he's a British writer, but oh no, he was Polish. He wrote in English after settling in England. Okay,
the reason I was tempted to say British is because when I was in 12th grade, which at the high school I went to was the year you usually covered literature from England, the English class I TA'd for was a 12th grade English class, and they covered this, which is why I've actually read parts of it, or heard parts of it read without actually having read the story. So I can tell you that that a lot of the elements of the story are there, just not the overall plot. But I have actually read about the time period in the Belgian Congo the Heart of Darkness takes place, and having all that background knowledge, which is what little I know about the story, I can tell you it does, at least from what I've read a little bit, does kind of reflect it. And it is kind of a, no, not kind of, it is a commentary on the atrocities set there. And transporting that to Vietnam, with all the controversy surrounding that war, I think it fits. Especially because the film, you could tell that there's a little bit of anti-war sentiment in this film. And given it's Vietnam, that works. And you could see that in Martin Sheen's character as the film goes on, and he learns more about Brando's character, Colonel Kurtz. He starts to critique Kurtz's methods slightly, more so when he actually finally meets the colonel and sees some of his methods, compared to what the army officially sanctioned. And it doesn't fully draw a conclusion, but it makes you wonder which method is better. His method, which goes a little bit overboard, or the method that they use, because both of them, if you look about it, are reprehensible, but both get results, though in different ways. And something else I'll get to, but it's one of those films that is entertaining, but also makes you think, and that's one of the things I think cinema should do, literature in general should do. It should entertain, but at the same time make you think. Now granted, there's also cinema that's just there to entertain, but there's room enough for both. But I have a slight preference for ones that can do both at the same time, but that's just me. Now, the plot of the film is it's set in 1969, during the Vietnam War, obviously. We're introduced to U.S. Army Captain and Special Operations veteran Willard, played by Martin Sheen. He's in a Saigon hotel awaiting reassignment, drinking heavily, and he's, musing about his life and failed marriage. Now, most of the heavy exposition involving him is delivered through a narration. And the way that it's worded, it's almost like he's either musing this as he's going or as he's coming back, or, as how I view it, probably in a report, either the special intelligence or, just a report that he's writing out for his memoirs, and he's just doing it in the report style. Either way it works, especially with how Coppola filmed and then eventually edited the film. It works to its advantage. Now, eventually he is called to a meeting with two higher-ranking military members, one of which is played by Harrison Ford, and the funny thing is the character's name is Colonel Lucas, and a civilian, presumably a CIA, known as Jerry. Jerry! Anyway, they assess Willard, and then they give him a mission, which is to go up the Nung River into the remote jungle and find the rogue Special Forces Colonel Kurtz. Kurtz apparently went insane and now commands a bunch of troops inside neutral Cambodia, and he rules there basically as a god. And his mission is basically to terminate the colonel's command with extreme prejudice. Now, as the film goes along, we learn more about Kurtz and what slowly drove him to think this way, because we never really find out everything about him. We find out details of his life, but not everything. And even when we finally do see him, some of the stuff is left unsaid, which I think it works to the film's advantage, because it makes you wonder what all did Kurtz see out there. Because if you know anything about the Vietnam War, you could probably guess a little bit of it. All the napalmings, all the battles with the Viet Cong, all the young soldiers being sent over there. Probably a lot of it combined to make Kurtz view the war this way, and then finally he snapped. And as the movie was going on, I thought of a line, ironically enough, considering that Harrison Ford is in this movie, from a Star Wars novel. It's Shatterpoint by Matthew Stover. The line is, I forget the beginning of it, but it's, I've gone sane, and there's nothing scarier than a Jedi who's gone sane. Now, paraphrase that, I've gone sane and there's nothing scarier than somebody who's gone sane. You could apply that to Kurtz, that from his point of view, his eyes have been opened, and he's finally woken up from the dream. And there's nothing scarier than someone who no longer sees through the spectacles of a dream. I guess you can say he no longer sees the world in the same spectrum as everyone else does. He sees it more, I wouldn't say he sees it like in a black or white, it's more of a weird gray color, to where it's hard to think of the right word to describe this. Nihilistic, maybe? It's just a weird viewpoint of how he views the world, which makes all the scenes involving Brando at the end very good, especially with how they're filmed, which I'll get to that. Now, along the way, obviously, Willard is going to have to be with people, so he's put on a PBR with Navy personnel. We got Chief, played by Albert Hall, Crewman Lance, played by Sam Bottoms, Chef, played by Frederick Forrest, and Mr. Clean, played by the young Larry Fishburne. Not a lot is really said about their past, but there's enough to where they each have their own separate character, but I wouldn't really say they're stock, but none of them really have a bunch of character development. But given this type of story, you don't really need to do it, because it's more showing the thing of the war. We do get a little insight to some of their backgrounds, like Clean is obviously the young one, so obviously he has his parents back waiting at home for him. One of them, I forget which one it is exactly, is a surfer back at his home, so which apparently even a high-ranking officer in the military is a fan of him, and that's, of course, Lieutenant Colonel Kilgore, played by Robert Duvall, which, if I'm looking right, he is the only actor in this film that got an Oscar nod for this, which is cool, but I think it's kind of sad. I mean, you can make the argument that Sheen deserved at least a nomination for best actor, and I guess you could also say Brando deserved one for best supporting actor. Then again, Duvall's Kilgore is such a memorable one. He has a couple of the most memorable lines in the movie, like "Charlie, don't surf," and "I love the smell of napalm in the morning," which is a military line that is quoted and paraphrased all over. Just the way he delivers it. The Kilgore character is probably the biggest commentary on the military tactics in the Vietnam War, with the use of napalm, which, if I remember right, it's not really used anymore, mostly because of Vietnam. I could be wrong on that, but I believe it is mostly not used anymore. And of course, the attacks in the morning, though you can make the argument they kind of were warranted because of how Charlie was, but I think it's kind of funny in a way that this shows just how America, military-wise, went from being rebels that used guerrilla tactics like the Viet Cong did to being basically like what the Redcoats were during the Revolutionary War. It's kind of also funny that America has basically become what Britain was back in the day, and even further back what Rome was. There's kind of a little bit of a commentary there. Now, of course, eventually they all make their way up the jungle after encountering some more things, finding a base that basically has no CO, so it's all basically enlisted people fighting for their lives each day. Tiger, among other stuff, running into a USO thing with the Playmates, and then of course they eventually run into Kurtz, which Kurtz is a very interesting character. Warrior poet is what he's called at one point, and that really does fit, especially with the ad-lib dialogue that Brando did, because one thing everyone always talks about when they bring up this film is the fact that Brando arrived on set unprepared, not having read the script of the story, in pounds overweight. Which, of course, we all know how Brando was, and being a method actor probably didn't really help much. But I'm glad that him and the director were able to compromise and come up with an ad-lib script, basically going out there old school wrestling style, giving him some notes and then coming up with lines. Because one of the monologues in this apparently went a lot longer than it does in the finished film, but they used some of the best bits, and all of Kurtz's dialogue is pretty good. Can't remember it all off the top of my head, other than this one line: "You're just a delivery boy sent by grocery clerks to collect a bill," which is kind of a interesting way to describe what Willard is in this film. Very accurate too. And it's interesting when Kurtz and Willard meet, just how they interact, as Hopper's character tells him he likes the Colonel likes him, and just with how the movie goes on from there, you could tell that Kurtz has probably been waiting for someone like him. I mean, as we find out, Willard is not the first person they've sent down there to kill Kurtz. I mean, a previous captain did, but succumbed to Kurtz's methods and basically became another lackey. But that doesn't really happen with Willard. It's like Kurtz has been waiting for someone who can resist his urges to kill him. But then also, probably at the same token, waiting for someone to do that and then become his successor. And with that, I know another weird, interesting Star Wars connection. It kind of reminded me a little bit of the Sith Lord mentality, each master teaching an apprentice, and then the apprentice eventually overcoming them and killing them, and all the lackeys being like dark side acolytes, not being allowed to know the true mysteries of the Sith, but still being used. Weird little connection and thought there, but this one, I guess the best way I could think of to describe it. And one of my favorite little Kurtz bits of dialogue is when he's telling him that he cannot judge him. I mean, he has the right to kill him, but he doesn't have the right to judge him. All stuff like that. And I think Wikipedia words it good that all the two conversations allow Willard some insight into how the hypocrisy of conducting a moral war drove this person, a pure warrior and a moral man, into madness. Which that is kind of true. I mean, conducting a moral war is kind of difficult. I mean, I don't want to bring up the whole sniper thing in this video, but it's like that. People complaining about snipers, yet on the battlefield they are a necessity to an extent. And just kind of, as George Carlin put it, that this phrase civil war is an oxymoron of a phrase. Now, when it comes to war, I would say probably that you should try to conduct it with the least amount of atrocities as possible, like, for example, allowing the soldiers to rape women in combat zones should not be allowed. If that happens, they definitely should be punished, because that's irreprehensible. I mean, just like, for example, using Vietnam, if somehow the Viet Cong managed to get sleeper cells into America and they attacked towns that did that to American women, you know damn well that the American news media would have been complaining about it and rallying, calling for the death of every Viet Cong person. Now, early on in the war, that probably would have stirred pro-war sentiment. Later on in the war, maybe not so much. Maybe a little bit, but probably not as much at the ass end of the war. But on the point, just because, let's say, they they rape Vietnam women and all that, it's like, it's okay because of that. And of course, that, connects a little bit with the imperialism thing that I mentioned earlier about America, the whole taking over Britain and Rome's old territory thing. And of course, the ending is very open-ended, and makes you wonder what Willard's going to do next. I mean, he leaves, but it just makes you wonder what's going to happen, especially when he gets back and reports. He's probably not going to want another mission, as he mentions at the beginning, but it's one of those endings that, this is the reason I say it makes me think, is he going to snap like Kurtz did eventually, or is he just going to overcome that tendency? Because as one of the officers mentions early on in the film, that there's a conflict in every human heart, but sometimes it goes a little bit too far, like with Kurtz. That is true, there is a conflict in every human heart. The whole good, evil, angel on the shoulder, devil on the shoulder thing, which that's one of the themes this film kind of does go with, which is one of the reasons I do like the way it compares and contrasts to a point Kurtz's method and the method that actually was executed in Vietnam. It's one of those things that makes you think, like, which method is better, or are any of them better than the other? Is it maybe just a perspective, just like good and evil? Because I know I'm still using another thing from Star Wars, but this is from the novelization of Episode 3. Evil is kind of a point of view, and at times it is just a label we put on those who view stuff different than us, but, there are actions that are considered good, like murder. I almost said murder was good. Like, saving someone's life, and things that are considered evil, like murder, rape, torture, stuff like that. And of course, there's also going to be some perspective thing, but I think the people who view rape and murder as good, they're probably in the minority. At least I hope so, they're in the minority. Anyway, the acting by all the actors is pretty good. Especially from Brando, Duvall, Sheen. Fishburne, you can see the actor he would become in a little bit in this role, but he's not with what little he has to work with. Coppola, I like the way he shot the film. Very different than the first Godfather and even a couple of his subsequent films. Like I said earlier, a little bit of an experimental style. I wouldn't go so far as to say avant-garde, but maybe just a little bit to the right or left to the right of that, where it has a little bit of touch of that, but not to the point where I would call it an avant-garde film. I know some of the scenes are probably in this movie you probably would not want to watch while high, but then again, maybe you would. Though on LSD it'd probably be weird. It's like, why is Marlon Brando staring at me, man? Oh my god, he just turned into Jesus. Something weird like that. While I'm on the subject of Brando, you can tell in a couple shots that he's overweight, but the way that Coppola shoots the film and lights it, they make him seem like he's bigger than he actually was. And I don't just mean like fatter, but I mean like taller, and like he's more built like a brawny man. Like, he has a little bit of a belly, but it's like, like an old school mountain man build, like the big arms and legs and the barrel chest, where it's like you push it in, it's a little flabby, but then you hit rock muscle. That's what it looks like. But there's only really two shots where you actually do see his chest. The first scene when he's sitting up and there's a little bit of light on him, and then the scene where he comes in to put the head in Willard's lap, but it's just a quick pan up. And all these things making Brando seem bigger than he actually is really do go with the character of Kurtz. He's like a larger-than-life figure in the jungle, and he's actually a big man. He's a man. Had to steal the WWE theme there. Now, the film was made for $31 million in late 70s money, and it made 250 million. That's according to Wikipedia. I'm gonna double check on IMDb. It says here it made about 78, so that's about right. Other than Duvall's Oscar nomination, it was nominated for Best Film Editing, Best Art Direction / Set Direction, Best Adapted Screenplay, Best Director, Best Picture, and it won Best Sound and Best Cinematography, the two that it really did deserve to win. Now, of course, it's time for the trivia. Clint Eastwood turned down the role of Captain Willard because he felt the film was too dark. I'd say it would have been interesting to see Eastwood in this role, but I think I'd have to say at the end of the day, Sheen was probably the better choice. It took Francis Ford Coppola nearly 3 years to edit the footage. While working on his final edit, it became apparent that he would need Martin Sheen to tape a number of additional narratives. Sheen was busy, so he called in his brother Joe Estevez, whose voice is nearly identical to Sheen's. And Joe Estevez was also used as a stand-in double for Sheen when Sheen suffered a heart attack during the shoot in '76. And he is uncredited for both. Apparently, in the opening scene in the hotel room, which was unscripted, Sheen was actually drunk, and he punched the mirror, which was real glass, and it cut his thumb. And he also started to sob, and he tried to attack Francis Ford Coppola. The crew was disturbed by these actions and actually wanted to stop shooting, but Coppola wanted to keep the cameras going, which you can see in the end result that it works. Let's see. Originally scheduled to be shot over 6 weeks, ended up taking 16 months. I want to know how they figured this would take 6 weeks to shoot. The water buffalo that was slaughtered in the film was a real one, which makes me wonder if there was PETA backlash when this film first came out, because you know nowadays if that were to happen, there would be it. Okay, that errand boy line was an improvisation by Brando. Like I said, he improvised a lot of his dialogue, including that speech. And at the end of it, Brando reportedly said to Coppola, "Francis, I've gone as far as I can go. If you need more, you can get another actor." The canteen scene with Lieutenant Colonel Kilgore and the wounded Viet Cong is based on an actual wounded VC fighter who fought while keeping his entrails strapped to his belly in an enameled cooking pot. The incident was documented by the photojournalist Philip Jones Griffiths. The real-life U.S. soldier was quoted as saying, "Any soldier who can fight for 3 days with his insides out can drink from my canteen anytime." That's a nice little bit of soldierly respect among enemies. Makes me wonder what happened to that Viet Cong after that. Apparently, before filming, Marlon Brando was paid $100 million in advance, and at one point he threatened to quit and keep it, but eventually they managed to get him to come in, mostly because they said they were going to replace him with actors such as Pacino, Nicholson, or Robert Redford. Jack Nicholson as Kurtz. That's just an interesting thought, but don't think it would have worked as well. Francis Ford Coppola threatened suicide several times during the making of this film. Does make me wonder how he would be remembered if he had gone through with it. He would have had 3 excellent films under his belt by that point. Well, maybe not so if he had threatened it early on, but what it made me wonder. And he lost 100 pounds while filming. 3 years, 16 months in the jungle, 3 years of editing. I can see why. Coppola spent days reading the Heart of Darkness novella out loud to Marlon Brando on the set. Makes me wonder what Brando thought of it. When Coppola asked Al Pacino to play Willard, Pacino turned him down saying, "I know what this is going to be like." Oh, let me do this in my Scarface voice. "I know what this is going to be like. You're going to be up there in the helicopter telling me what to do, and I'm going to be down there in the swamp for 5 months with the cockroaches." I couldn't resist that last one. The shoot actually lasted 16 months. Marlon Brando so angered Francis Ford Coppola that the director turned over the filming of Brando scenes to the assistant director. Kind of reminds me a little bit of the filming of, I believe it was Marnie, when Hitchcock had to direct Tippi Hedren through intermediaries because he couldn't stop being a pervert. Harvey Keitel, I always slightly mispronounce the name, Keitel, was initially cast as Willard. 2 days into shooting, he was replaced with Martin Sheen. according to Coppola, one piece of film with him did make it into the final cut, though you can't really see him in a shot from the distance of the riverboat as it's moving to the water. Wonder how that would have turned out with him, though. I like him as an actor. There are no opening credits or titles. The title of the movie appears as graffiti late in the film, which reads our motto, Apocalypse Now. This was done simply so the film could be copyrighted, since it could not be copyrighted as Apocalypse Now unless the title was seen in the film. I think that's good that it doesn't really have a traditional credit sequence. I mean, it has that opening sequence with the Doors song, but I really wouldn't count that as like a title sequence. While in pre-production, director Francis Ford Coppola consulted his friend and mentor Roger Corman for advice about shooting in the Philippines. Corman's advice, don't go! Wonder how my friend Alvin would think about that. His family's from the Philippines. Nearly 200 hours of footage was shot for this film. Would be interesting to watch all of it, I bet. Nick Nolte has said that he has never wanted a role more than that of Captain Willard and was very disappointed when Coppola picked Harvey Keitel. When Keitel was fired, Nolte thought the role was his, but Sheen eventually got the role. Although top billed, Marlon Brando does not appear until more than 2 hours and 2.5 hours into the movie Redux version, and his total appearance time is 15 minutes. That's a little funny little thing. Sam Bottoms was on speed, LSD, and marijuana during the shooting parts of the movie. Look at his character, you can see that. Oh, this is a nice one. The famous helicopter battle where the helicopter swooped in on the village while playing The Ride of the Valkyries was meant to be an ironic comment on the Vietnam War. In the original I always pronounce it Wagner. In the original Wagner, as I was saying, in the original Wagner opera, the Valkyries arrive at a point of apparent victory, but which later results in defeat. Thus, the apparent victory in the helicopter battle will be followed by the eventual defeat in the war. Kind of an interesting choice of music. I wonder how many people actually caught that without, reading it on IMDb. But then again, I didn't even know the opera was about that. Robert Duvall's Oscar-nominated performance as Colonel Kilgore amounts to just 11 minutes of screen time. When asked what he thought about Brando's $3.5 million fee after a New York City screening of the film, former Brando colleague Tennessee Williams reportedly said, "Gee, I don't know, I think they paid him by the pound." I wonder what Brando thought of that when he was told. Coppola invested several $1,000,000 of his own money into the film after it went severely over budget. He eventually had to mortgage his home and winery in Napa Valley in order to finish the film. In fact, throughout the 1980s, he had to work as a hired gun for other producers instead of his own projects to pay off the enormous debts he had incurred. Well, at least he got the finished film done. Most of the dialogue was added in post-production as extraneous noise, such as the helicopters, left many scenes with unusable audio. While in the movie the main character is sent to kill Kurtz, in the source novella the main character is sent to rescue him. Kind of a nice little flip there. When Francis Ford Coppola first described the role to Marlon Brando, Brando remarked that an American colonel would not have a name like Kurtz, which makes me wonder what his justification for that would be, considering this is a melting pot country. He would have an English name like I think it's Lille or something like that. Lille. Having never read Heart of Darkness, Brando did not appreciate the reference. Brando eventually read Heart of Darkness, but not until after the film's completion. After reading the book and liking it, Brando demanded his name to be changed to Kurtz, and Harrison Ford's lines were dubbed to accommodate him. And the commentary, this is connected back to the Buffalo thing. Francis Ford Coppola downplays his involvement in the controversial slaughter of the water buffalo, saying he happened to film a ritual being performed by natives. However, in the article, cast and crew detail how Coppola staged the entire scene, directing the natives to chant and sing while they killed the animal, which Coppola provided. Afterwards, Coppola went overboard and ordered a whole truckload of animals, which he gave to the natives to slaughter on camera. However, only one water buffalo slaughter was used in the final cut. Makes me wonder which story is true. Coppola did do that. I can understand why he'd want to downplay it. But who knows, maybe the cast and crew were bitter. It's one of those weird things. Connected back to the Ford thing. Harrison Ford was allowed to pick his own character's name, and he chose Lucas to honor George Lucas, who had directed American Graffiti and Star Wars Episode 4. Just like G.D. Spradlin's character is named R. Corman after producer Roger Corman. Steve McQueen was the first to turn down the role of Captain Willard. He had initially verbally agreed to play him when Coppola agreed to a salary of $3 million, which is the equivalent to a little over $13 million in 2013 dollars. But after thinking about the fact the work would require months of on-location shooting in the Philippine jungle, McQueen told Coppola he'd rather play the Kilgore role instead, which would require much less location work as long as he was still paid his full salary. Coppola, who was essentially self-financing the movie, simply couldn't afford it and said no. Makes me wonder how Kilgore would have come out if it was Steve McQueen, but, you know, that character by Duvall is so iconic, it makes you wonder what probably wouldn't have been as good, one of those weird things. Apparently, George Lucas was originally sent to direct Apocalypse Now from a screenplay by John Milius. Lucas's initial plan was to shoot the movie as a Fox documentary on location in South Vietnam while the war was still in progress. Francis Ford Coppola, who was to be the executive producer, tried to get the film made as part of a production deal with Warner Brothers. The deal fell through and Coppola went on to direct The Godfather. By the time both men were powerful enough to get the film made, Saigon had fallen and Lucas was busy making Star Wars. Milius had no interest in directing the film, so Lucas gave Coppola his blessing to direct the film. I'd have to say Lucas's direction style probably would have fit a Fox documentary. I'm surprised he actually hasn't directed a Fox documentary like that. Like, even if it's just a short Star Wars film, Fox documentary, like an Empire propaganda film, you know, that would be very interesting. Fight the rebellion today. The famous line, "Terminate with extreme prejudice," is spoken by Jerry Zeismer, who also served as the film's assistant director. Martin Sheen had a heart attack during the filming, and some shots of Willard's back are of doubles, including his brother. Coppola was so worried that backing would be withdrawn by the studio and distributor if news of Sheen's heart attack leaked out that he kept it quiet, even to the extent of explaining Sheen's hospitalization as being due to heat exhaustion in the official shoot schedule. Randy Tom, one of the film's sound mixers, said the sound mix took over 9 months to complete. Given how long it took to edit, I'm not surprised. Philippines President Ferdinand Marcos agreed to let his army supply the helicopter and the pilots used in the film. The Marcos government was also fighting rebels in the area where filming was taking place, and sometimes withdrew the helicopters and pilots when they were needed in battle, replacing them with pilots who weren't familiar with the filming, which caused some problems. In a 2006 interview, writer John Milius said that after he had written the now famous line, "I love the smell of napalm in the morning," he thought to himself, "This is over the top. This will be the first thing they take out." He was wrong about that. Fits the character. Let's see. The letter Martin Sheen is reading in the deleted scene, "Letter from Mrs. Kurtz," is actually a poem by Jim Morrison. A typhoon destroyed sets, causing a delay of several months. I guess that explains the 16 months. According to the George Lucas biography Skywalking, Lucas's decision to pull out of Apocalypse Now destroyed his working relationship with Francis Ford Coppola, who felt betrayed and all but ended their friendship, and the Colonel Lucas character was meant as a backhanded snub to his then ex-friend. I'm guessing that's why he let Ford do that one, because he thought it would be interpreted as a snub. Well, I guess it's just me thinking it's a nice little connection given Harrison Ford's playing it. It would be years before they would be on speaking terms again, and they would not work together again until 1986's Captain EO. I mean, I could see a little bit why he might have been betrayed, but, you know, financing and all that. According to writer John Milius, he wrote the entire script of the movie listening to only the music by Richard Wagner and the Doors. To him, the music by the Doors had always been music of war, though when he at one point mentioned this to the band, they were horrified. As to them, it was the exact opposite. Ironically, the lead singer of the band Jim Morrison was a son of George S. Morrison, who was an important admiral of the United States military. Kurtz reads from the T.S. Eliot poem The Hollow Men. Eliot was inspired to write the poem by Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad, the book on which this movie is loosely based. The first line of the poem reads, "Mr. Kurtz, he dead." Kurtz leaves this line and the following lines out when he reads. Also, the photojournalist said, "This is the way the fucking world ends. Look at this fucking shit we're in, man. Not with a bang, but with a whimper. With a whimper, I'm fucking splitting, Jack." This is taken from the same poem's last two lines. This is the way the world ends. Not with a bang, but with a whimper. That's a good way to end a poem. I know, if I remember right, I think in my current English class we're supposed to be studying T.S. Eliot for a day. I hope that's one of the poems that's in the book. The visit by the Playboy Playmates was based on an actual visit by 1965 Playmate of the Year Joe Collins. She was so popular with the troops that she was made an honorary GI. The scene in the beginning where Willard is moving around chaotically in his underwear and eventually punches the mirror was filmed on Martin Sheen's 36th birthday. Happy birthday! That's a nice happy birthday. In May 1979, this became the first film to be awarded the Palme d'Or at the Cannes Film Festival before it had actually been completed. Because the Cannes jury was unable to come to a unanimous vote, the film shared the Best Picture prize with The Tin Drum. And according to Wikipedia, when it won the first one, there was some jeers, which makes me wonder, was it because the film was not completed? Or was it really that too soon after Vietnam that people were like that? One of Francis Ford Coppola's top 5 favorite films of his own. Now, the people on the riverboat were actual Vietnam refugees who had come to the Philippines less than 6 weeks earlier. Guess they found out about him and grabbed him in. Was voted Best Picture of the last 25 years by the Dutch movie magazine Screen on December 3rd, 2002. Let's see. The film holds the record on the MovieMistakes.com website for the movie with the most errors, a total of 395. Well, given how long the film took to shoot, I'm not surprised there's that many errors in the film, continuity-wise. Emilio Estevez hung out on the set of the movie in the Philippines with his father, Martin Sheen, during the filming of the movie. When casting for The Outsiders 4 years later, Francis Ford Coppola remembered Emilio hanging out on the set and wanted him to play Two-Bit in The Outsiders. James Caan was the director's first choice to play Colonel Lucas. Caan, however, wanted too much money for what was considered a minor part in the film, and Ford was eventually cast in the role. Which creates a very interesting thing about the character, that he's a full colonel, higher ranking than Willard, yet he looks a little bit younger. Of course, there's also the thing that maybe he's served in previous, maybe he is older, just looks younger, and he's probably been serving for a little bit, probably in the previous 2 wars where promotions were a bit faster. According to an interview given by Robert Duvall, Kilgore's name was originally going to be Colonel Carnage, but they changed it to make their statement about him a little less obvious, and also, I guess, to make him sound less like a Marvel villain. Jeff Bridges auditioned for the role of Willard. Editing the helicopter napalm attack took 1 year to complete. Approximately 10% of the footage, shot 130,000 feet, was from that sequence itself. Using the Ride of the Valkyries on the soundtrack was John Millis's idea. He claimed that it seemed so obvious to him that he almost didn't write it, as he was certain it had to have been done in a film before. Well, I guess that's kind of funny. I don't know if it had been done before, but since then it's been done a lot because of that scene. Anyway, there's a little bit more, but the only other one of interest on here is that Martin Sheen's character's name combines the 2 names of Harrison Ford's eldest sons, Benjamin and Willard. But anyway, that's about it. My rating for the film, I would be so bold I'd have to give it a 5 out of 5. at least the theatrical cut. I think the Redux might get a little bit of a less one, because then again, I haven't watched it yet. If you're a fan of Vietnam War films, a fan of Coppola's directing style, a fan of the actors I've mentioned, definitely a film you should check out.